Namo Su Shri Ye, Namo U, Namo Shri Ye Su Ha, O Namo Manju Shri Ye, Namo Su Shri Ye, Namo U, Namo Shri Ye Su Ha.
藏经学道做经修那拉讲究不多当年叫藏经大概学习级别从那罗拉培学藏经主播修藏经学道做经修那拉讲究不多当年叫藏经大概学习级别从罗拉培学藏经主播修藏经学道做经修那拉讲究不多当年叫藏经大概学习级别从 罗拉边界藏经主播有啥些别界学员没到长沙上人民的解放的别不，这个那大金拉结吧，有也当古多人那面着那个那呀大呀咦。那么这里那个去地上地方那些修堂那些得着，修堂台湾那修呢，修的。 다 동아진에 신주되다 탕지 다그 센데 만나시 거든 친구 샤다이 마마지 버지자메 마시바라 tanji 마차바이 진지지 만드나 대원 대저 랑도 고로 지병 그 등엔 바시 용원이 대가 기지점도 진지지 만드나 예지 피슨 소보다 체나 점마로 제바 주지 제바 샤오 사 도스키 사는 방주 샴바고야.
Please say it according to 7 meditative posture of Vairochana. Then all sentient beings who have been our mothers, and they have been our mothers for numberless times. Their kindness to us is exactly the same as the mothers of this life. All kind mother sentient beings, though they want happiness and do not want suffering, but not knowing the object of abandonment and adoptions properly, they only create the karma that bring forth the result of suffering only. So in our mind, strongly cultivate loving kindness towards all kind mother sentient beings. May all kind mother sentient beings have happiness. How nice if all kind mother sentient beings have happiness. And I will cause all kind mother sentient beings to have happiness.
더 대지점 동아진나이 된지지 만드나 고슨 좀 디비 쪽 타다다 전에 점마로 자와 주지 자와 다기셔 대다시니 몰라말이 신질라도서 또 신인지지 공셔서.
Next, we cultivate compassion toward all kind mother sentient beings. How nice if the three doors of all kind mother sentient beings were free of all adversities. May three doors of all kind mother sentient beings to be free of all adversities. I will cause the three doors of all kind mother sentient beings to be free of all adversities. Lama, please bless me to be able to do so.
대지점 동아진나이 마진도한 타다나비 신제 탕체 다 간단 코와다게 그 동아를 도인게 슬라포고도 생게 녀랑라 포스 녀랑라 포제다 디네 가서 양다바 저비 상지지 공부하는 게 니바네 다 니바도 슬라요스는 양다바 저비 상지라 예비 그래서 이제 탕지지 때도 상지지 공부하는 거지 전에 저 다바 샤오 냐메 장주지 신 공주스.
Next, we cultivate bodhicitta. First, we ask ourselves, who should take the responsibility to free all sentient beings from the sufferings of three lower realms and of whole samsara. The answer is, I should take the responsibility to free all kind mother sentient beings from the sufferings of three lower realms and of samsara. But I do not have the ability to do so. Only those who have achieved the state of enlightenment have the ability to do so. Therefore, for the sake of all sentient beings, by all means, I want to become Buddha.
다 대제에서 돈번 주변에 주제선은 당시 다다 풍보다랑 이치다 타대 강도야 마두비 대랑 이치 주비 동화 인상 도서 주제선 당시 돈번이라.
Next, we meditate on emptiness, that I do not exist intrinsically one with the aggregates, nor intrinsically different from the aggregates. Thus, I do not exist intrinsically.
다 대제에서 구롱치야지라. 신체 탄지진의 산지지 공부도 대체도 다 간다 담비치 세네 냐네 측인도 진에 대신지를 펜버두이 사 등디 구롱치 세다시스로.
Said motivation. For the sake of all sentient beings, I want to become Buddha. For this purpose, I'm going to listen to the holy teaching and practice accordingly in order to benefit sentient beings.
뭐야? 당가서 상대 되려래. 로리라 송대 이와요. 된주 소미의 시비 또바 시바다. 다랑세 소미의 시비. 와. 도메 만주 시바. 메바 상나지. 소미의 시비 도메 주시 송. 네가 내려와 상대.
That's all. Yeah, so this is where I'm going to begin with the threefold divisions of awarenesses and knowers. So with respect to the threefold divisions of awarenesses and knowers, there are three parts. Explanations of conceptual consciousnesses, they take a meaning generality as their apprehended object. Second, explanations of non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses, they take a specifically characterized phenomena as their apprehended object. And third, explanations of non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses, they take a clear appearance of non-existent as their apprehended object.
다 당보디 들어와.
된지.
된주 소미의 시비 또바 시바. 다 간다 데 또바 시오로와. 다 다딘 제로 집이 쉐리데 또비 체니세. 다 가서 나지 또바스는 만보 이시는고요. 다 된다데 디 심바적으로 다딘 제로 집이 쉐리데 또비 체니세.
So the first one, conceptual consciousnesses that take a meaning generality as their apprehended object. So there are two parts, definitions and divisions. So the first one is the definitions of a conceptual consciousness. So we always talk about conceptual consciousness, conceptual thought, conceptions. So this is the definitions or the meaning of conceptual consciousness. A determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed.
다 간다 디 롱도와 또바들라 다 다딘 힘이 다데 드라제탄 된줄라 샤그리에스로와 다 데니 제반 짐바네 다 데니 초반 짐바리에세 오다디시 담보.
Yeah, so from the definitions, and we can see that apprehends a sound and apprehend a meaning. So this sound, the sound here refers to the sound generality, and the meaning refers to a meaning generality. So that which apprehends these two, sound generality and meaning generality, as mix, apprehends a collections of these two.
다 중앙세 메바텔라 고바 이르슬란도와 다 중앙 메고비 고바 가스나 다 달라 마장이 다 소소 지오지 시바지 또바티 드이 고바리에세 고바디 레세 달라 마장 비르와 다 달라 마자비 지비지 또바나 다 간다 the darin de dun zibe tobal se de goba yorese ro
Yeah, so there is a purpose for saying suitable to be mixed, as suitable to be mixed, the definitions of conceptual consciousness. So as suitable to be mixed, and there is a purpose of saying suitable because it is necessary to include conceptual consciousnesses in the continuum of a person who has not trained in nomenclature. So because of this reason, therefore, it has to say suitable to be mixed.
Da di ji toba de danin reba manzija dadin derun zimba tsang yese dan de lo tanda da la ma jambe tindi chibi ji shirwa dadin reba zin sewa de kanda derun da akar chi shi son
가리시소.
ni de shin son ka interest
가리시도소.
lo me
이디오.
cha dan do
Lo.
understand this marina tos me wa cha son
That's
다 간다 데르도 다든 데룬도 지서와 다 다든 데반 지서와데 다 드라치다 텐진니가 니가 엔짐바텔라 다 간다 다든 니가 짐바텔라 로와 데 다든 데반 지스 다 달라 마잠비 텐디 시바티 간다로와 다 야미 드라치 짱바 야미 텐지 짱바 나마 대지 또바 텐지 짱바 나와 텐지 송자 디 간다 다든 제run도 짐바레면 리반 짐바 마레세 리반 짐발라 다치다 텐지 니가 짐부레스로 니가 다 데니가 안짐부 마레세 간다로와 데니가 짐부 데니가 짐나 초반 짐도로와 어딘 짐부 마레세고 된 제룬 잠짐바레세가 된다들이
달라마 장와다 왜나 아니 다경 양나 다경 나와 양나 된경 나와라
오 된장바
된경 제가 된지 경화 나와라
된지 장바다 양미 다지 장바 나와 된지지마도 단 니가 다지다 된지 니가 지금 말해서 니가 지스나 단 제반진도 더 초반진도 그러와
얘네들 된지 진유요 말
어딘 지금 말해서
Yeah, so then you can there is a purpose for saying suitable, and the reason is it is necessary to include conceptual consciousnesses in the continuum of a person who has not trained in nomenclature, and then and this is because then again to quote to give the reason, this is because conceptual consciousnesses in the continuum of such a person does not apprehend sound and meaning generalities as mixed, but merely as suitable to be mixed. So what it means here is the conceptual consciousness in the continuum of such a person refers to the person who has not trained nomenclature. So they do not apprehend sound and meaning generality as mixed. They only apprehend it they either have the appearance of sound, a mere appearance of sound generality, or a mere appearance of meaning generality. So they do not apprehend the sound and meaning generalities as mixed, but merely as suitable to be mixed, because they only have either the appearance of a mere appearance of sound generality or a mere appearance of meaning generality. So to include such consciousnesses, therefore the word suitable is used. Yeah, so what I have explained here, then when we come to the divisions, then we will talk about it.
다 도디샤지 주주지 당신 님바스나 본비기 천이래 본비기 당하래 와 도디샤지 주주지 당신 님바데 데 본바 임바 시에스나 다 본바다 도디샤지 주주 당신 님바가 미den진 저와데 시에스나 데 간다 다지 당신 니가 시에사래 데 니가 시에사로 와다 단다데 다지 장바데 도디샤지 주주지 당신 님바 본바 임바 메시비 데 제비지 본바 시비 다 장라티네 데 본지 도바다바데 데 다지 코나 지비 도바레 마도 다데 된진 지금 말해서 거와 된진 지금 말해서 거
So there are three divisions when the conceptual consciousnesses are divided. So the first one is conceptual consciousnesses that apprehends only a sound generality, that apprehends only a meaning generality, and conceptual consciousnesses that apprehend both a sound and a meaning generality. So there are three divisions here. So the illustration for the first one is a conceptual consciousness that apprehends only a sound generality is a conceptual consciousness in the continuum of a person who doesn't know that a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the function of holding the water is a pot, which generated in dependence on merely on the sound pot, apprehends pot. Yeah. So so this is the definitions of a pot, a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding the water. So this one sentence here is the definitions of a pot. So in what we means by knowing a pot, what do we mean by knowing a pot is knowing that a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding the water is a pot. So this whole thing is knowing a pot. So this is how it defined as knowing a pot. The bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding the water. So the pot here is a name, and then here is the definitions of pot, which is meaning. So if a person knows what is a pot, then the person knows the name and the meaning. So the meaning is the front part, pot is the name. So if the person do not know this is a pot, so a conceptual consciousness apprehending a pot in the continuum of a person who doesn't know that a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding a pot is a pot, holding water is a pot, which is generated in dependence on merely on the sound pot. So this is the conceptual consciousness that apprehend only a sound generality.
ate kanza te jiji ta to doan thong zang la tini chibi te to doan zimbi toba shi chigri yese teni to doan zimbi toba te ta tenji changban zimbi toba re ma to drachi zing ma re se gorwa.
So the difference here between this one and this one is independence on merely on the sound pot and seeing a bulbous thing. So now we come to the second one, conceptual consciousnesses that apprehend only a meaning generality. And meaning generality, the illustration for it is a conceptual consciousness, the same person, is the same person. Is a conceptual consciousness in the continuum of such a person who doesn't know that a bulbous flat-based thing is able to perform the functions of holding the water is a pot, which generated in dependence on merely seeing a bulbous thing, apprehends a bulbous thing. Yeah. So this the second illustration for the apprehend only a meaning generality, this conceptual consciousnesses apprehends a bulbous things is generated in dependence on merely seeing a bulbous thing compared to this one. So this one is generated in dependence on merely the sound pot. This one is in dependence on merely seeing a bulbous things. This one apprehends pot, this one apprehends a bulbous thing.
Da sumba de rendoa da sumba de dadi nigan zibe toba de kanda de bomba ro bomba shibi jibi jiji da bonzi toba taba de bomba shibi jiji jibi jiji bonzi toba de da kanda dadi nigan zibe toba re yesir ro da bomba shi sewa de to de che jiji tenju nimba bomba imba shibi gone de la kanda to de che jiji tenju nimba da bomba ni mi de ndewa mi da tenji ndewa di shibi tone de kanda tendi ponzi toba de roa ponzi toba de kanda niga da dade niga zibe toba re se de lawore
niba de any tuen shingi ore ming shingi o marwa
o de dan changban ziba roa niba de
tuen kaza tuen ji kyama jimba de any de tuen jibo shingi ore de ming shingi o marwa
o de shi pomba je ta dachi di shingo ma dachi zingo marwa
dachi de jingo mare
o din zingo ma
yeah. So the second illustration is the person do not apprehend the sound generality. The person only apprehends the meaning generalities only. So which is the meaning of the pot, a bulbous thing. So now we'll come to the third one, is the conceptual consciousness that apprehend both a sound and a meaning generality. So is a conceptual consciousness in the continuum of a person who knows pot, apprehending a pot. What does it mean by a person who knows pot? A person who knows pot knows that a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding water is a pot. So this is what it means by a person who knows pot. He knows the meaning of it and the name. So meaning and name. So in other words is a person who knows the association between the name and the meaning knows the object. So who knows a pot because he knows the meaning a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the function of holding a water, and the name is a pot. So a person who knows that knows a pot.
다 봄비 드라치의 텐치 간신아 지다 들은도와 다 봄비 드라치의 텐치 가르스나 다 또바 담보라 나이 나와네 드라치 담바레스 다 또바 담보데 또디셔 유치지 텐지 니바 봄바 임바 미시비 데 지부지지 봄바 시비 드라츠나 티니 지비 본지 또바 요로와 텐지 본지 또바 데라 자 간다 로와 봄바 나이 나와데 드라치 담바레스 워
Yeah, so what are the sound generality and meaning generality of pot? So that appearance, which is an appearance as pot to the first conceptual consciousness in the above three illustrations, is just a sound generality. So the sound generality is, the sound generality is the appearance as pot appears to the first conceptual consciousness. What is the first conceptual consciousness? A conceptual consciousness in the continuum of a person who doesn't know that a bulbous flat-based thing that is able to perform the functions of holding water is a pot. And this conceptual consciousness apprehending pot is generated in dependence on merely on the sound pot. So the appearance as pot appears to the first, which is this first conceptual consciousness, is just a sound generality. So the appearance itself. So the appearance, which is an appearance as pot, appears to the first type of conceptual consciousness, is just a sound generality.
봄바 임바 미히비 제비 디지 또도안 통화잖아 되니 또도안 통화잖아 되니 집이 근데 또도안 지금 또바디 해서로 또도안 지금 또바디 다 또바데라 또도안 나이 나와디 또도안 나이 나와네 다 된지 장바리 해서로 또도안 나이 나와디 된지 장바리 해서 다지 말이 해서로
Yeah, so the meaning generality is appearance. Yeah, so meaning generality or sound generality is an appearance. So that appearance, which is the appearance of a bulbous thing to the second conceptual consciousness in the above illustrations, is just a meaning generality. The second conceptual consciousness is a conceptual consciousness apprehending a bulbous thing in the continuum of such a person, so who doesn't know that a bulbous flat-based thing able to perform the functions of holding the water is a pot, which is generated in dependence on merely seeing a bulbous thing. So the appearance of a bulbous thing appeared to this second type of conceptual consciousness is just a meaning generality.
다 또바 숨바디로와 다 또바 숨바디 봄바 히비 지비지 본지 또바디로와 다 또바 숨바디 봄바 히비 봄바 히비 지비지 본지 또바디로와 본지 또바디 다 본지 또바데라 간다 다 간다 봄바 나와다 또도와 나이치 데 다지다 된지 니가 난 거래서 그러와 다지 된지 니가 난 거래서 다 봄바 히비 근데 또도 자지 주지 되지 님발라 봄바 임바 히비 토네로와 봄바 임바 히비 토네 데 간다 된지로와 본지 또바다 본지 또바데 다 간다 또바데라 봄바당 봄바 또도와 나이치 다 다지다 된지 니가 난 거래서 그러
So when either a pot or a bulbous thing appears to the third conceptual consciousness in the above illustrations, there is the appearance of both a sound and a meaning generality. So the third conceptual consciousness is a person who knows pot. So a person who knows pot, and the conceptual consciousness apprehending a pot in the continuum of such a person who knows pot. So when either a pot or a bulbous thing appears to the third conceptual consciousness, this conceptual consciousness apprehending a pot, then there is an appearance of both a sound and a meaning generality.
That is the Da Kanda Dajing also the Dodi Chichi Tenji Nimba, Pumba Imba Meshibi Chibi Gigi, Pumba Shibi Dratzalatini Chibi, the Punzi Topate, this shower Dutch Chamba Shagora, Dutch Chamba, or Dutch Chamas Toba. That in the shower that Tanda de Dilea Dishield, one Matsabandabochi. In this Dratzalati, Tobi Nawaina, that Dutch Kona Ibi. Chagurevesna, de Chagumarte, Gumarese, that you could de Todi you choose Tenjini, but La Pumba Imba Meshibi, Chibi Gigilo did Kakarwa, or Todi choose Tenjini, but Pumba Imba Meshibi, Chibi Gigi, Pumba Chibi Dratzalatini, Punzi Topate, take on the Dutch Chambare, then did Dratzana Timbi Tobi Nawaina, Dutch Kona Mares, Pe Karishazna, Ron, Ranzito Balarua, Ron Ranzito Bala, Ta Ronja, Ronyawa Nawate. The Ronja, Ronia Nawasna, Ronja, Ungola Ancho Tisia, Ancho Hambanashi, Ra, Dinashi, turned the Bandaboji, the Nawat, Roa.
The Hakomason.
The
Ribon Ragola, a Ribon Ragola.
A little you shall Roa.
Rungawa.
Or that you should ride.
That's it. Sick did a yore, the any digasa, the double set the.
Or that the Chagumares, the Hakosa. Or Dratana Tibi, Tobi now and that Dutch corner, Igumares, Kanda, Romura, Tenji the Legend Dura. Da Rura, Tenji the Kanda, Drazala Tibi, Tobi Nawari, Dutch corner, Marti, Dutch the Tenjinica, Resor. That Dutch Tenjinica.
You need because a Ribonja,
Runanzito be Toba Jora, Runanzi Toba Jora. Oh, Topatilla. Da Kanda Topatilla, Tindi Nawatiroa. Dratsana Topi Nawa, Dutch Kona Mare, Dutch the Tanjinica, Nangres, Dutch Tanjinica.
You need Ribonja, and it because a Meva Mare,
Yomare.
Oh, you need because a Daji and Tunji need the Tunji can teach her.
That's this is Kalekabore.
Lazo.
That the only low man charge.
Lazo.
I'm not Toba the world, Toba the Linda. That Toba the Yatopal in a Miju Toba, the Tenju Tobas Nindua. But that the Toba de Yanja de Toba de la Miju Toba, Tenju Tobas, Nishua, that the Machirua.
So
I did Toba Colanga, Janja Leo, that Toba.
So at this point, as the here conceptual consciousness, the threefold divisions of awarenesses and knowers. So at this part, then we are mainly talking about conceptual consciousness. So besides the three, when the conceptual consciousnesses are divided, besides these three divisions of a conceptual consciousness here, besides this, then we're also going to talk about conceptual consciousness, another two divisions. So when besides the two divisions that we mentioned just now, and conceptual consciousness can be divided in another way. So there are two: conceptual consciousnesses that are fixed names and conceptual consciousnesses that are fixed meanings.
That is that kind of Miju Toba, the Tenjo Tobas Nilewundua. That delay answer Tambu de Miju Toba Sewade, Todo and the Pumba, Yan Zibi Toba de. That Tambu showed the Toba de Kanda, Miju Toba, the Tenjo Toba Ninga, Esewa, that day. Roa, Todo and the Pumba, Yan Zibi Toba de, that Miju Toba, Tenjo Toba Niga, Ese. That day in be Junsin the Ma Shewunda Walla. Roa, in be Junsin as the Corina, that Pumbigi, Mindi Jan Zimbi Shiri, Stambo de Miju Toba in be Junsin Casna. Roa, Pumbi Midi Jan Zimbare, said, that Kanda, told the Pumbigi Tanroa. todo at pumbi tanroa. Bomba de ta bomba hibetindi mi todo at la bomba hibetindi mi da tani roa mi da ten shibitone roa mi de shibitone kada roa ta mi de gindewa shibitone zibi toba kada de roa todo an bomba wonya zibi toba tigi todo la bomba ni mi de gindewa shibi torin zibi bunzi toba de chawore roa o de shendo di ta kanda 미데 자네 미다 단 자서 또도ade bomba 이바 bom바니 미데긴 대화 받자네 덴디 시비토네 대간다 안지미 또바텔라 대간다 미조 또바다 미 담보데 미조 또바 이미 준세 데리에스로 미다 단이 자네 짐바 단데 또도와들와 또도와텔라 bomba 힘이바 미 대시비토네 간단 짐비 또바데 다 미조 또바세
So, 김신 당보디 주보시하러
담보 지보
So, yeah, so conceptual consciousnesses that affix names. Another word, and I see other translations as well, is a conceptual consciousnesses that associates names, associates with name and associates with meaning. So a conceptual consciousness that apprehends its object within thinking, this bulbous thing is a pot, is both a conceptual consciousness that affixes a name and a conceptual consciousness that affixes a meaning. So this bulbous thing, so bulbous thing is the meaning, pot is the name. So a conceptual consciousness that apprehends thinking this bulbous thing is a pot. So is both a conceptual consciousness that affix a name and is also a conceptual consciousness that affix a meaning, because this conceptual consciousness because this conceptual consciousness apprehends the object associating the names with having associated the names with the object. So the reason he's here, respectively, it is the first referred to as conceptual consciousnesses that affix a name. So because of being a determinative knower that apprehends its object within affixing the name pot to the object, the bulbous thing. So the reason why a conceptual consciousness that apprehends thinking this bulbous thing is a pot is a conceptual consciousness that affixes a name, because it is a determinative knower that apprehends its object within affixing the name pot to the object, the bulbous thing. So in easier way is this conceptual consciousnesses knows the association between the name and the object or the meaning. So the meaning is a bulbous thing, or in other translation they also call object or meaning. So the bulbous thing, and then he knows the association between the pot and the meaning, the bulbous thing. So conceptual consciousness that apprehends this bulbous thing is a pot is therefore is a conceptual consciousness that affix a name.
또도는 bomba 오냐는 집에 또바데 다 미주 또바마치 대주 또바 레스고로와 대주 또바 레세 다 대주 또바 이비 진세 디켄도와 치지 자는 집이 시리레세 다데 치지도 bomba 코로나 하자 치지도 bomba송 치치데 또도와 그러와 다 또도와 아데 간다 bomba 임비 시비토네 다 또도와 데로와 또도와데 다 치지 bomba 임바 시비토네 집에 또바티 치기다 치지 자네 엔지테르와 치기다 치지 자네 짐비히리스 다 치기도 bomba 코로나샤 치치도 또도와 샤로와 다 또도와라 치지 bomba 임바 시비토네 인지비 또바딜라 다 된죠 또바세.
And this conceptual consciousness that apprehends thinking this bulbous thing is a pot is also a conceptual consciousness that affixes a meaning. Why? Because of being a determinative knower that apprehends its object within affixing attributes to a substratum. So attributes is other words is quality. Substratum is the basis of quality. So because of being a determinative knower that apprehends its object, having affixed the quality to a basis of quality. So the quality here is the bulbous thing. This, a bulbous thing. So it's a quality. And to a substratum or basis of quality is a pot. So the basis of quality for this example is a pot. So this conceptual consciousness apprehends having known that a bulbous thing is a pot. In other words, having affixed the quality to a basis of quality.
That Minju toba the tenju toba the tanda dringasoma, todo and the Pumba, Nyan toba de, that niga res, Minju toba, tenju toba res, logrua, that the reni in the Shusarwa. That digi jilanja, tenju toba is na, Minju toba yigu resna, that de gumares loya. That Minju toba in a tenju toba yigu res, de yigumare, de yimuguba the Sushagresna, that Jebin the Yupa chino se, the Ninyam zibi toba digi. tenju toba re ma do minju toba ma re se ruwa da mingi gyungse keke jaguyo ma ruwa jibun dana yupa chen ho se indila wa ruwa jibun dana yupa chen ho se de tenju toba re ma do minju toba ma re se war chigi de jibun ruwa
mitang tuyen de jigiyo ma ruwa
den jigiyo ma re chigi de jibu chi ruwa da chichi yupa jan ruwa chichi yupa jan den jibu toba de da kanda tenju toba re minju toba ma re se war
So then whatever is a conceptual consciousness that affixes a meaning is not necessarily one that affixes a name. For a conceptual consciousness that apprehends its object within thinking, this person has a stake is a conceptual consciousness that affixes only a meaning. So it is a conceptual consciousness that apprehends its object within affixing an attribute, stick to a substratum person. So here is kind of saying that there is no pervasions between a conceptual consciousness that affixes a meaning and conceptual consciousness that affixes a name, because a conceptual consciousness that apprehends thinking this person has a stick is just a conceptual consciousness that affixes only a meaning, that affix a meaning, but is not a conceptual consciousness that affix a name. So this person has a stick. So the person is the substratum or the basis of quality, and the stick is the attribute or the quality. So because this example, a conceptual consciousness that apprehends thinking this person has a stick is just a conceptual consciousness that affixes meaning, not a conceptual consciousness that affixes name. So there is, therefore, being this is not necessarily a conceptual consciousness that affixes name.
That dijila dilondo, that topa in a kanda, Miju toba, the tenju toba, a kanu igreves na te gumares or that toba in a Miju toba, tenjo toba nigo, nimbo kanu chigreves and te gumares. That de moguya the karishavana, roa, that chiju pumba zan zibi toba tabade, deni kaya mares or roa, chiju pumba zan. That chiju pumba zan zibi toba te, kanda Miju toba mare, Miju toba ina. Toa da Pumbigi made Jabiton made in the white Jabiton Zingua, de Mares. That Tenjo Toba Mare, Tenjo Toba Mai Jinsakasana, go Toa Chiju Pumbala, that Chichi Toa Jabiton Zingua, or Chichi the Chigi the Chichi Janis in Toba Mares. Ko Pumba Zanzi Tobarwa, Chigi Pumba Chibo Zanzi Tobarama, made Kake Janis Marwa. What in Manzi was that the Mijo Toba, the Tenjo Toba Kaya Mare.
So again, also, whatever is a conceptual consciousness is not necessarily either of those two. So if a person asks, as long as it's a conceptual consciousness, is necessarily either of those two, these two. Conceptual consciousness that affix names or conceptual consciousness that affix meaning. So is that right? Then the person replied, there is no such pervasion. So whatever is a conceptual consciousness is not necessarily either of those two, because a conceptual consciousness that apprehends merely the substratum pot is neither of those two. So this conceptual consciousness that apprehends merely the substratum pot is not a conceptual consciousness that affixes meanings, because there is no quality here. So only the substratum is here, the basis of quality is here. There is no quality is mentioned. The quality is not apprehended. So therefore, this conceptual consciousness is not a conceptual consciousness that affixes a meaning. The affixed meanings. And it is not a conceptual consciousness that affixes names, because this conceptual consciousness do not apprehends the association between the name and the quality, between the name and the meaning, or the name and the meaning. So because of not apprehends the association between these two, therefore this conceptual consciousness that apprehends merely the substratum pot is not a conceptual consciousness that affixes a name.
다 미주 도바 엔저 비샤와나 가산데 방랑오냐데 가사시와데 방라 타오진바 가스킬 쉬인바 가사스와드와 가산데 방랑오냐데 진비 도바데 미주 도바리 예서와 다 가산라 방랑로와 방랑시 방랑데 미 레고라다로와 가산데 방랑오냐데 진비 도바데 미주 도바리 예세.
Yeah, so to give you another example to make this conceptual consciousness that affix names and meanings clearer. So an example is this a conceptual consciousness that apprehends a colored thing with white predominating thing. A colored with white predominating thing, or predominated thing, is a cow. Yeah, so you know cow has black dot and everything, right? So a colored black can be black or can be a brown color, for example. So a colored with white predominated thing is a cow. So such conceptual consciousness apprehends that is the illustration for a conceptual consciousness that affixes name.
다 간다 미주 도바타니 데 로아 데니 민데 민데네 로아 민데네 다시오 냠비 데니 도바타베지 요로아 민데 다시오 냠비 도바타바 미다 민데네 로아 가서 민데네 다시오 냠비 데니 도바타베데 다 미주 도바리 간다 로아 민데네 다시오 냠비 도바데 미주 도바리 예세.
So another example is easier to understand. So a conceptual consciousness thinking that person is Dashi. So a conceptual consciousness thinking that person is Dashi is an illustration for conceptual consciousness that affixes names.
다 양장 가서 denjo 도발 비 샤바이너와 페마 까봇 메도 페마 까보요아 페마 까본데네 까보 냥도 냥도 집에 또바데 페마 까본데네 카도 까보 냥도 집에 또바데로와 또바데 다 denjo 도발이 해서 간다 denjo 도바
페마 까보디 카도
페마
까보
까본데네 카도 까보 오세 다 페마 까보디 카도데 그 카도도 가르스네 카도데 까보레 해서 된들와 된데 까보레 해서 예순자 다 denjo 도바세요.
된디 카도 까보로와
페마 까보게
기취로 이제
페마 까보고 페마 까보데 주지데 간다 가르스나 카도도 가르스나 데 카도도 까보레 해서 이제 까보 냥도 지금 또바데 다 denjo 도바
된주 동안에 페마 까보디 캐시로 이제 페마 까보
지지로
카도 까보에는 데 캐치로
어디 지지로
so yeah. So an example for conceptual consciousness that affix meanings, for example, a conceptual consciousness thinking this white lotus, this white lotus, its color is white. So this white lotus, its color is white. So a conceptual consciousness thinking that is an example of conceptual consciousness that affix meaning. So the white lotus is the basis of quality or substratum, and the white color is the quality.
데 들어와 간다로와 다 안장 가서 된주도 완다 빼셔나 야나 뭐지 빼셔나 야는 라진노 남비 되게 또 빠지러 야는 라진노 남비 로와 라진노 남비 또 빠데 된주도 바레스 간다로와 치시 야데라 치치 라지데 바자네 로와 치시 라드로와라 로와 야는 라진노 남비 되게 또 빠데 된주도 바레스
Rade Kichuroi.
치치로와
So another example is conceptual consciousness thinking this yak has horns. So this yak has horns. So such a consciousness thinking that is another example for conceptual consciousness that affixes meaning, because the yak is the basis of quality or substratum, and horns is the quality or the attributes.
我的地址呢，我都是的这样蒙不接受啊，这样蒙不有的米就多吧，点就多吧，是都是接受啊。他地址呢，我这地嘛就学的，他地我嘛就说多吧了呀，多吧点的多吧点问题是领导啊，呀多吧里有的是吧？他大家我说多吧嘛蒙不接受的，米就多吧点就多吧，你也成的，人家多吧了，多吧点的多吧点问题，你是地嘛学的是吧
？So there are many others example there are many other examples of the conceptual consciousness that affix names and affix meaning. So I only give those examples, and you can think of others. So besides that, conceptual consciousness can be divided in this way. Conceptual consciousness can be divided in another way as well. So again, there are two divisions: factually concordant conceptual consciousnesses and factually discordant conceptual consciousnesses.
我他讲的多巴说的，我是一些当家上当过的，我是往西的时候多巴是你早晚呢，一些些要嘛是吧？我是先把猪呢往西啊的一些记得猪油啊，猪呢我是多巴的看看的，上当修的一些了嘛都往西的时候多巴这些些要嘛是吧
？So here we mainly talk about conceptual consciousness, and you have to understand that conceptual consciousness is a mental consciousness. Conceptual consciousness is mental consciousness. It talks about mental consciousness only. So it doesn't refer to any of the five sense consciousnesses. So we talk about six consciousnesses, yeah. So 5 sensory consciousnesses and 1 mental consciousness. So here, when we talk about conceptual consciousness, it only refers to the mental consciousnesses, not any of the 5 sense consciousnesses.
他多巴等的多巴等门的呢，等你嘛来呢，这点这种这边心理等的多巴等的就成立了哇，这点这种这边心理等的多巴等的就成立，我的当不的是哇。
So the definition of a factually concordant conceptual consciousness is a factually concordant determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed.
我这的老多啊，多巴等的时候的，被习主呢圈子被多巴等的被巧克力还是的老多啊，我习主呢，但等我这被把国的问到我老家人呢，是吧？本把的习主过是吧？本把的习主过是吧？习主被就是讲开始学在了哇，前面主把的习主个前面下才了哇，开始我这那些公买学在了哇，
前面主个有了，
我前面主过是吧？我前面主把是在带习主。这一周写下有吧，写下一周有，就是他们团队基本上是开始写啥了哇？
第十周写下堂，
写下有吧，写下一周有，去，就是他们的团队基本上也是写了哇。
有去，
去，我的写出的，他讲的多把团体是话的了，但写主呢，对圈子里多把团体人过来也是过来，他别下我的，他本把的写主过了哇。本把的写主要是啥？他本把这边多把有了啊，他本把这边多把的，他多把团体也是，但因为就是呢，我的我现在他本把的写主过来，可本把写主要是啥？本把的写主把那些本子多把的，可能真把那些都本把的团队有了哇，对吧？是吧？写主过来是吧？有啊，是啥？他多把团体也是个。
Yeah, so if something is an established base, the conceptual consciousness apprehending it is necessarily a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. So if in other words is a conceptual consciousness, its object is an established base. Conceptual consciousness, its object is an established base. So a conceptual consciousness, apprehending it is necessarily a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. So you still remember what an established base is, right? So previously we talked about that which is established by a valid cognitions. Then we talk about the valid established base. We talk about the object of knowledge or knowable object, existence, object of comprehensions, object and phenomena. They are all they are synonymous. So if something is an established base, the conceptual consciousness apprehending it is necessarily a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. Why? Because the conceptual consciousness, because that established base exists. Because that established base exists, then a conceptual consciousness apprehending it is necessarily a factually concordant conceptual consciousness.
다디 가서 또바 텐지 다 난지 저나서 또바 텐지 세와데 다디 하코바 치고로와 베나 시투나 춘지베 또바데 또바 텐팅 그래서 거와 시투나 다 담보데 또바데게 텐티 레머레 또바데게 지야데 또바데게 또야 여로와 또바데게 지야 유데 인두다 만두 왜네서 그런 짐만하시 대한한 누가 만두사데 제바체고 또바 코랑게 유든 짐바나시 왜네 대나 여바이나 또바 텐디 차고 베나 신집이 또바 신대지 도로와 신도 먼저 신도야 신기 도모 아 장주 제기라고 어디 지리로와 어디 지리데 만서 어디 지린 집이 또바데 또바 텐디레 대인지 어디 지린 집이 또바데 또바 텐디비 진짜 가서 어디 지리 코랑 시도로와 신대 장주 제기 코랑 시도로와 그 시도와 선자 대 장주 제기데 집이 또바데게 집바 나시 당연라 내가 열에 장주 제기 열에서와 이왔습니다. 또 또바 텐디리 장주 제기 집이 또바데 또바 텐디리 해서와
Yeah, so we have to understand this. If something is an established base, the conceptual consciousness apprehending it is necessarily a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. So if a conceptual consciousness apprehend an object and that object exists, then that conceptual consciousness apprehending it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness, because the conceptual consciousness apprehends the object and that object is an established base. It exists. It does exist. So a conceptual consciousness apprehending it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. For example, body tree. A conceptual consciousness apprehending a body tree. So that body tree, a body tree is an established base. So the conceptual consciousness apprehending it, the body tree, is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness, because the body tree is an established base, because it exists as it is being apprehended. It exists and it exists as it is being apprehended. Therefore, it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness.
다 또바 텐디 생아지 들에서 와라 다 또바 텐디 간다 또바 텐디 코랑겐 지나지 여디 여바이나 단 지나지 여스나 고고나 지나지 여디 여바이나 다 또바 텐디 잡어라 또바 되긴 지나지 여디 여바이나 다 또바 텐디 다 또바 되긴 지나지 여디 매바이나 심마두나 다 또바 텐면 디레 간다 또바 되긴 지나지 여디 시주바이나 다 또바 텐디 또바 되긴 지나지 여디 심마두바이나 다 또바 텐디 잡어야 말이야 다들 얼마래 그러와.
Yeah, so in other words is the conceptual consciousness, its object of the modes of apprehension exists, then it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. And if the object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness doesn't exist, then it is not a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. So I repeat, object of the mode of apprehension of a conceptual consciousness, if it exists, then it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. The conceptual consciousness apprehending it becomes a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. So if the object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness doesn't exist, the conceptual consciousness apprehending it is not a factually concordant conceptual consciousness because the object being apprehended is not an established base. So the definitions of a factually discordant conceptual consciousness is a factually discordant determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a mini generality as suitable to be mixed. So a factually discordant conceptual consciousness. A factually discordant conceptual consciousness. So its apprehended object doesn't exist, is not an established base. So the conceptual consciousness apprehending it becomes a factually discordant conceptual consciousness. Example is conceptual consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit is a very common and a famous example. Yeah. So conceptual consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit. Horns of a rabbit is not an established base, right? So the conceptual consciousness apprehending it becomes a factually discordant conceptual consciousness. And, because the object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness doesn't exist. Object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness doesn't exist. In other words, is the conceptual consciousness apprehends an object that is not an established base, is a factually discordant conceptual consciousness. So basically, the things being apprehended it doesn't exist. So it doesn't exist as is being apprehended is what it means by factually discordant. It doesn't exist in reality as is apprehended.
Does it include mirage?
Huh?
Does it include the mirage?
Mirage. Oh, mirage. Yeah.
Yeah, mirage. Yeah.
其實嗱，你點搣出嚟呢？接不接近呢？
明知是那当俺做，等到的多巴里小鬼了哇。多巴里小鬼人俺做，呀，看人也不能往西的，所以等到多巴给这小鬼要嘛了哇。等到的讲这个人，米就村子比多巴要啊，米就村子比多巴。
米就村子。
米就村子比多巴的，所以打多巴他们提来等到，米就出的，看到了哇，你这边多巴的，看到米就的出来要嘛了个，出来要嘛了，我这是在的打多巴他们提来。但是主要的嘞，可能主要的米就的嘞。
米就的嘞。
我打的是，这强老也打了的是，这多巴他们提来的是。
看你我不那为那往西的些个嘛咯。
这些要嘛了，都是往西了，多巴嘛了。
Yeah, that's all. Yeah. So that is correct. So a conceptual consciousness apprehending mirage as water. So since the mirage that doesn't exist, so there is no water that exists in reality. Therefore, it is a factually discordant conceptual consciousness. So a conceptual consciousness apprehending mirage as water. So this is an example of a factually discordant conceptual consciousness.
Excuse me, Ken, but this is not a conceptual consciousness, right? If you see a mirage, is a non-conceptual, is it not?
Yes, so now, yeah. Then I need to make you the tongue you now any the double maras.
Mare miji chudi de nga jang rimbo tawdi de chure sha san zibi topa jora amase di mishi ki shigo mare ro
yeah
indi jang rimbo tadi ta mishi ki tambo yo chi chi chunda boji tonggo ro ji ji tong yo chi tongdi oda de chure sha san de sang tongge de yi shi le sare ma to wang shi le de le ya ma ro de chang ba ro ma si mishi ki chang ba re chang de ko yi sar.
Yeah, at first we see a mirage, right? So that is a sense consciousness. But this sense consciousness induces a thought that, oh, that is a water. So that is a water, or there is water. So then this has come to the mental consciousness already. So conceptual consciousness apprehending mirage as water. So this is a conceptual consciousness. So it has passed, it has go beyond the boundary of sense consciousness.
Then also John Rimbotan di Mishi Kure Yotsisi Chundabuji Nadi Kuchure Sansa de Mishila Yomarago. Di Mishila Chia Yomara. But then Mishi Chamba Kandarwa, the Yotsisi Tony, or that the Churesha Asan Zingi, the Topa Chia Saremato, then Mishila Tandichia Yomara.
Yeah, this is when your eye consciousness see a mirage, then you think that, oh, that there is water, or that is water. So this a conceptual conscious, a sense consciousness cannot conceive or cognize in that way, or cannot have such conception, cannot have such thought. So when we think that, oh, that is a water, so when we see a mirage, and then this eye consciousness induce a thought that, oh, there is water. So then it becomes a conceptual thought, apprehending mirage as water. So as go to the boundary of mental consciousness.
That de la soba topa tementi ba mambo chance shaire. That dra taban zibi topa de topa tementi ya. Dra taban zibi topa de topa tementi. That topa tementi so the topa korange be nzimba nashi de tana ndu mundu de tawre. Nzimba nashi tana munduna de topa tementi chasa roa. Tan nzimba nashi tana yoba ina de topa tementi chawo roa. Ta ngaso mambo roa. Be lende meban zibi topa Lende meban zimbi toba, the so kanda toba termentiriwa, toba termentiriwa, or this toba termentiri. Tangazo mamul jashura, that is so that medo taban zimbi toba, that is sama toba termentiriwa.
Yeah, so if it doesn't exist as is apprehended, then it becomes a factually discordant. If it exists as is being apprehended, then it is a factually concordant. So there are many others example, like for example, there are many other example like conceptual consciousness apprehending sound as permanent, conceptual consciousness apprehending karmic cause and effect as non-existent, conceptual consciousness apprehending flower as permanent. So those are factually discordant conceptual consciousness.
Depe chida ngaso ke chimbo chagore ngaso nanji pe susuge nyane chiala ngoy ne tsige nyane chiade tenda kibachi ndu mundu se yimi ta de cheba chere topa tendi da topa temti di thola sang de ligurwa ta susuge ngone thane ndige nyane yabu cheba na digin rebude ngoy ne tsige yabu ndu mundu rowa tembo je ndu mundu that is one as a 20 se that chidang to bal she chidang also dade taban jimbi to ba to ba tementi ina mina ngaso chidang phento ke yo mare ngaso tanda jaya de susu ge so nyani chiala jaya ro ngoy ni chige tanda re duga mandu se ta pa ngaso pe jana pe de shenda so la pe ta da taban jimbi to ba sewa de so la pe ja ro jugura taban jimbi to ba de so to ba tementi the topa tendise, the so tenda needs the Manso Landoji, she the super sosuge, Nyani Chiala, that dribble the Nine, Dilla Nyani Chiba and dribble do Mundus, Ding as Chipachini, there's also the Kanda tenda dodo the Dirida, Roa, or Tendi Nyani Chia, the Tenda Timbaji Chekore, Tenda Mantimbaji, Nyani China, Kali Mambo, then Drebbe Meba Chanua, Kali Mambo Drebbe Meba, Manso. Pain up you are the Cora Jene, Cora Katse Mambo Jena, Lea Keo Marisa and Ojiana.
Lea Yomari.
Lean Yomaris Cora, Hindu, which is Cora, Catijana, Lean Gio Maraco, Cora, Taro, Gidia, Roco,
Lea yo mare.
the Leaki, my Hindu Chila, Cora, Jana, Cora, Jaton, Catjana, Ta, Dilroco, their mother, Hinda Saja Lendra, Homaraco.
Yeah. So yeah, because when we are studying factually concordant and factually discordant, then we give examples like conceptual consciousness apprehending the horns of a rabbit, then the sounds permanent and not permanent, etc. So if just merely thinking that conceptual consciousness apprehending sound as permanent, how to say it is because merely thinking about it, merely think about sound is permanent or not permanent itself. So it doesn't bring much purpose. So you have to bring it to your practice. Apply it to your practice means that when we practice the practice itself, whether it is factually concordant or factually discordant. So if it is a factually discordant practice, then no matter how much you put effort into that practice, since it is a factually discordant, it will not bring results. So when we practice, then we must practice that we must engage a practice that is factually concordant. So by engaging in that practice, then you will experience that result. So just thinking about merely thinking about horns of a rabbit, etc., it doesn't bring much purpose. So we have to apply it to our practice, and otherwise, then there is an example. Is like if you keep circumambulating a tree, for example. So if you want to go to a place, if you keep circumambulating a tree, you will not reach the destination. So we must get our path right.
Topa di kandan jinda yude yoda mede song ta ro topa di jinda yude yoba renduna te topa de tantiris topa di jinda yude meba renduna te topa de gamen timbare esro that di song tundu de petap de bo rendo go.
Yeah, so very short so that we can keep our mind to understand whether it is to differentiate whether it is a factually concordant or factually discordant is whether the object of the mode of apprehensions of a conceptual consciousness exists or not. So whether the object of the mode of apprehensions of a conceptual consciousness exists or not. If it exists, then it is a factually concordant conceptual consciousness. And if the object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness doesn't exist, then it is a factually discordant conceptual consciousness.
다 님바데 란세 존이 시베 도미 만치 시바데 다데 카시 지당 을 해서로와 님바데 디마 쉬어이로와.
Yeah. So the second is so the second is non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses that take a specifically characterized phenomenon as their apprehended object.
란세 존이 시베 도미 만치 시바데 랑게 나요라 만치 사나지 리바데 랑니 도미 만치 시비 칭예세 데렌도 랑게 나요라 만치 사나지 리바데로와.
So the definitions of something being a non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness is a knower having clear appearance that is non-mistaken with regard to its appearing object.
다 데라 간다 데 카싱아 수 슈사레 데다 롱에 숨바 던지스 란도아 카시 롱에 숨바 송 골 슈사라 장사 진도사레 로아 롱에 숨바 던지스 다 데라 이에나 간다 왕에다 잉에다 랑링에서 nen종에서다 시 공도 시 심비 시바 샤우스 딜란도아 데 카싱아서 롱에 숨바기 체니세 지슈사랑이 저 안젤이 로고로와.
Yeah, so the two, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness and directly perceiving awareness are synonyms. So directly perceivers, so we have already covered this. So divisions of this, divisions of non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses are divided. They are four: sense non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses, mental non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses, self-knowing non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses, and yogic direct perceiving non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses.
다 카시 간다데 왕에 잉에 랑링에서 nen종에서 레레 마 이와 마보시사라 다 왕에서 간다랑기 디모메 다지집에 왕부스 제발라티니 집이 간다 시바지 고라 왕에 세워들어와 다 뒤서 가서 쇼사를 다 제바지 쇼사를와 다 왕의 집에 세마 지해 나라 망해봐 다 잉에서 정말 대가로 집바 샤이바 다 되노라 만다 가서 난중에서 집에 나라 망해불어 여마지 디마도 디신다 건가라 간다 이와도 창사 집바 임바 이와들어와 왕빙에서라 다 세마 지해 나라 망해봐 송 다 잉에들라 다 세마 지해 나라 망해봐 송 그 랑리들라 세마 지해 나라 망해봐 송 다 난중에서들라 세마다 지신이 여바지 나라 망해봐 여마레세 러선도와 같이 살아와
대지바지경 로이질라 ninjo ngusung tome tumegi sheba
참아는 수와
yewa jibaji경 로이질라
집바지자 난중에서들라 다 디어 마시고라 나라 망해불어도 여마레세
나라 마
세마다 지신이 여바 집바지로와 엔다 건가라 세마다 지신 나라 망해불어 송송요와 난중에서들라 나라 망해버도 여마 난중에서나 랑게 영 니비 차우레서 거와 그렇지 뭐 돈이 lungi 타요와
Yeah, so here you say here it says non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness and directly perceiving awareness are synonyms. Yeah. So previously we have already covered direct perceivers. So then refer to that, then they are same. So non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness and direct perceivers, so they are same. So the divisions are exactly the same as well. Sense non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses and sense direct perceivers are synonyms. Mental non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses and mental direct perceiver are synonyms. Self-knowing non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses and self-knowing direct perceivers are synonyms and similar to the yogic direct perceiving non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. And their divisions are exactly the same as well. So for sense direct perceivers, so previously when sense direct perceiver is divided, then it's divided into three. That is direct valid cognizers, subsequent cognizers, and awareness to which object appears but is not ascertained. So there are three divisions for sense direct perceivers. So the three divisions are similarly applied to sense non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses as well. So for the first three, sense, mental, self-knowing, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness, the divisions are the divisions are exactly the same. There are three: valid cognizer, subsequent cognizer, and awareness to which appears but is not ascertained. And then yogic direct perceiver non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousnesses is the same as the yogic direct perceivers as well. So, but compared to the previous three direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers has only two divisions: valid cognizers. There is a valid cognizers, and there is a subsequent cognizers. Because there is no yogic direct perceiver is awareness to which object appears but is not ascertained, because being a yogic direct perceiver is necessarily realize or ascertain its object. So the third division is non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses that take a clear appearance of a non-existent as their apprehended object. The definitions of something being a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is a knower having clear appearance that is mistaken with regard to its appearing object.
So when
non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses are divided, there are two: sense consciousnesses that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses, and mental consciousnesses that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses.
다 도미 티게 장이 다 랑게 티모만 다지지 원부스 지발라티니 지바인 비신팀바데 다 도미 디르와 원시치 와 도미 티게 원시지로 도미 티게들라 지비 원시다 이지 해바니 샤고로와 다 당보대 원시 도미 원시디 진실와 도미.
So the definition for the first one, a sense consciousness that is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is that which is a common locus of being a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and being produced in dependence upon a physical sense power that is its uncommon empowering condition.
다 님바데 간다 도미 티게 장이 다 랑게 티모마 다지 집이 요한나 티네 이 제바이 미신티바데 다 이히스 집이 티게 데로와 도미.
Yeah. So the second division is a mental consciousness that is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness. Definitions of it is that which is a common locus of being a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and being produced in dependence upon a mental sense power that is its uncommon empowering condition.
다 간다 도미 티게들라 간다 디우데 이 원시스 집이 도미 티게다 다 이히스 집이 도미 티게 니레군도와 다 간다 도미 티게들라 데니도와 원시스 집이 도미 티게다 이히스 집이 도미 티게 다다이 공능 가서 또바 티게다 또바 텐디 때문에 이게 시고로와 다 단다데 가서 다 단다 집어래 원시 텐디다 때문에 도미지 이히바 티게들라로와 도미지 티게들라 이히스 집이 도미 티게다 원시 집이 도미 티게 니시고도와 다 원시 집이 도미 티게데 베나 강릉은 보나 원시도 저들와 강릉은 보나 원시도 동가 심보나 원시 그래서 원시 집이 도미 티게로와
대 당보디로 아이죠.
당보로 원시 집이 도미 티게데.
Yeah, so previously we are talking about conceptual thoughts or conceptual consciousness. Yeah, so here we are talking about non-conceptual. So a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and divided into two, sense and the mental consciousness. So the example for the first one, a sense consciousness that is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is sense consciousness to which a snow mountain appears as blue. So that sense consciousness to which snow mountain appears as blue is an example of a sense. It is a sense consciousness and a non-conceptual, but it is a mistaken consciousness as well.
다 간다 원시 집이 도미 티게로와 다 간다 랑게 다 간다데 강릉에 보나요 원시 동가세 보나요 원시로와 그래서 간다 원시 집이 도미 티게로와 원시 집이 도미 티게로와 다들 이시 집이 도미 티게서와 다 간다 니라나 간다 로와 다다 랑보신 나와 니라나 다다 랑보신 나와 그래서 간다 로와 다 이시 집이 도미 티게로와
다당 랑보체
와 다다 랑보시도 나와데 다다 랑보신 나와서 다다 랑보신 집이 다 니라나르다 니라나 다다 랑보신 집이 된디게 해바도 간다 이시 집이 도미 티게레스 다다 랑보치 페사와 나이 된디 밀란치 해바 요로와 다다 랑보치 사와 나이 밀란치 해바도 다 이시 집이 도미 티게.
So besides sense consciousness to which a snow mountain appears as blue, a sense consciousness to which a white conch shell appears as yellow. So there is another example for the first type, sense consciousness that are a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness. So the example for the second type, mental consciousness that are non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, for example, a dreaming consciousness. So to which horse and elephant appears clearly. So to a dream consciousness, horse and elephant appears clearly, then that is a mental consciousness. They are non-conceptual mistaken consciousnesses.
간다 되니까 도미지 해바 되면 팀바래와 다이 또발라 되면 팀바래 되면 팀바니 계시고요와 다 단다데 도미지 해바 되면 팀바데 원시 집에 도미 티시다 이시 집에 도미 티시 되니까 간다로와 도미지 해바 되면 팀바 다 도미지 해바 되면 팀바 간다 원시 가능여보나 원시데 도미지 해바 되면 팀바래 되면 팀바 임베제 가르스나 가능여보나 원시 되게 그런 게 주요 가능여보디 요 말와스 주요 가능여보데 문도아스로와 매와선자 데코 원시 집에 도미 되면 팀바다 간다 원시 집에 도미 되면 팀바로와
도미 되면 되로이죠.
도미 되면 팀바다 원시 집에 도미 되면 팀바다
So previously we talked about factually concordant conceptual consciousness. Yeah. So here can be, I say, to this I say, in this context, then there is two divisions again. So factually concordant 그래서 디탄다 니가 양 되미 되로 이제라. 니가 양 되미 되로.
간다 지도 이시 집에 왕시 도미 시바 때문에 지도 왕시 집에 도미 때문에 디바들와.
Yeah, so conceptual consciousness, there are two divisions. One is factually concordant, another one is factually discordant. But for this particular context, non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, there is only one division, which is factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. Yeah, non-conceptual. 도미 시바로 와이잖아. 도미
시바로 왔다. 니가 도미 시바로. 도미 시바래. 다 간다 도미 시바들라 던지다 때문에 니 레고요 와. 다지 또발라 지바래. 나도 또발라 또바 던지다 또바 때문에 니 쇼임바. 아 도미 시바 던지세 와들라. 다 도미 시바 되게 주의돼 여바이나. 도미 시바 되게 주의돼 여바이나. 다 도미 시바 던지. 도미 시바 되게 주의돼 매나. 다 도미 시바 때문에 디바래세. 다 도미 시바 던지세와데 칼리자스나 매돈 집이 미시죠로와 매돈 집이 미시데 다 도미 시바 던지래 매돈 집이 미시데 다 매돈 집이 미시데 도미 시바 던지면 이제 매도 집이 미시되게 다 매도된 집만하시 매도도 되나 요런 주의도 요로와 요와 선자 다 도미 시바 던지래고.
Yeah. So for this non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, there's only one division, which is factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness, because it is a mistaken consciousness. Like for example, why do we say that the sense consciousness to which blue mountain appears as blue is a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness? Because its object of engagement doesn't exist. Its object of engagement, which is a blue snow mountain, doesn't exist. Yeah, because of such object of engagement, a blue snow mountain doesn't exist. Therefore, that non-conceptual consciousness is a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. So, yeah, and then besides this, so out of this context, so is there any factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness or not? Yes, there is. For example, eye consciousness apprehending flower. So eye consciousness apprehending flower, since flowers, which is the object of engagement, exists. So since it exists, therefore it is a factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness. So in brief, its object of engagement exists, then it becomes a factually concordant. If its object of engagement doesn't exist, then it becomes a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness.
다 도매지 쉐바 단지다 때문에 니가 다이 또발라 잡아나시 로와 다 도매지 쉐바데 베나 본지 미시다 까완지 미시로와 본지 미시다 까완지 미시 늦사마 도매지 쉐바 단지로와 도매지 쉐바 단지로와 도매지 쉐바 단지로와 오다 도매지 쉐바 단지 다 도매지 쉐바데라 단티 이비 제제데 랑근 주의디 여비 준세 도매티 이비 제제데 랑근 주의디 메비 준세 다다 이페 또발 자당데 지바르다 그러 완시다 또박이 제발해 마도와 완시다 또박이 비체발해 마도 그런페 단티 이미세와 그런게 주의데 어디 염했다고다 지당 주의데
또바이네 데 주요 말어 와이실라
또바데 단지당 주요와 그런 단지당 주요 단 주요 란난디단 디고와
주의인데래
단지당 주요 그런 또바디긴 진다 주요디 여바이나 어다 또바텐디레서와
그래서
근데 단다 도미지 셰바 속에 그런 건 주의디 여바이나 도미지 셰바 단들이 도미지 셰바 되긴 주의디 매바이나 도미지 셰바 단만디 바레스.
Yeah, so again, in brief, object of engagement of that non-conceptual consciousness exists, then it is a factually concordant. So if the object of engagement of that non-conceptual consciousness doesn't exist, then it is a factually discordant. So there are many examples that you can list, like for example, eye consciousness apprehending vase, eye consciousness apprehending pillar. So these are factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness. Why it is so? Because the objects of engagement exist. So this is almost the same as, so this is similar to the factually concordant conceptual consciousness and factually discordant conceptual consciousness. So whether it is a factually concordant or discordant or not depends on its object exists or not. So for non-conceptual consciousness, depends on the object of engagement, whether it exists or not. So for conceptual consciousness, then is whether the object of the mode of apprehensions of that conceptual consciousness exists or not.
Sheila, can I ask for the just now number B, non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness? Are there also division for factually concordant and factually non-concordant? Since I was just thinking it's non-mistaken, so it only have concordant.
또메다 또마 그래서 또메마 투에 쉐바이나 대양 튼튼 집으로 아이슬라.
제일로 튼튼이 또메 만지 쉐버스다 또 만지 또메 만지 쉐버스 가서 배 원빙에서 이징에서 라링에서 nen종에서 세서 샤오요와. 그래서 제가 간다. 참아디는 디노라 고성의 순간 가더라.
Yeah, so all these are factually concordant. There is no factually discordant. 또바 되미트인데요 말와.
너요 말이에요. 또바 되미트 늘 디고 말다. 또 밖으로 가러 와서 네 무슨 게저 쉐우로와.
Yeah, so now in here non-conceptual, non-mistaken consciousness. Yeah, so here is not it's not a conceptual consciousness. Yeah, so it refers to the direct perceivers. It is a concept consciousness, but it's not a conceptual consciousness. Yeah, so it refers to the direct perceivers. So here there is only factually concordant direct perceivers.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I have any question?
So just now Geshe-la gave under C, non-conceptual, mistaken consciousness. Geshe-la also said that, Geshe-la at first said that this only discordant in this group. But later Geshe-la give example, I consciously perceive flower. This is an example for which division?
Yeah, so yeah. Ini di kazan tome two sheba di tome two sheba ina di kaza tome temi tuen jiboro aisla. Ini di toba temi tuen di jibo imba je. Ini di yang kaza pumjing kaza medo jimbe wangshi de shigi yorowa. Ini di yang tome kaza tuen tuen ro aisla. Ini di kaza nganso tanda kap di na toba tuen tuen di yomaro yewa di yomaro. 또미 튼튼 건다. 또미 튼튼이 요마로.
안다딩 가서 또미 튼튼.
또미 투시 나데 또미 튼미 튼이 요마로.
단다 가서 튼튼 또미 쉐바의 시오리 또 튼면티 바 단다 가르며 보나 왕시에서 또미 쉐바 튼면티 바래. 다 또미 쉐바 튼면티 라오리 다 또미 쉐바 튼이지 쉐고다 디페셜 가도 당고 말해. 다 단다데 쉐고로와. 또미 쉐바 튼면티에 서리 또미 쉐바 튼티데 간디지 구군도사 다딩한테 시고로와. 또미지 쉐바 튼디데 내가다 가완지비 미시다 메돈지비 미시 로와 뜻 봉지 미시에서 주샤임바 내가 가르며 보나 왕시데 또미지 쉐바 튼면 팀바레스로와 가르며 보나 왕시 또미지 쉐바 튼면 팀바.
Yeah, so when we talk about non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, so this particular consciousness is a non-conceptual, a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. Yeah. So, but when we say that this is a non-conceptual, factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness, so out of this context, yeah, because it is factually a concordant non-conceptual consciousness is not, as I mentioned explicitly in the text. Yeah, so it's not explicitly mentioned in the text. So whether is there any non-conceptual, factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness or not, there is. Then the example is like the sense consciousness apprehending flowers and pillars.
Sense consciousness apprehending flower is a direct perception. It's yeah. So sorry, non-conceptual is. For English terminal, non-conception, can we define that as perception?
perception. Tada tome na di kasa perceptions the perceptions.
Direct perception.
Direct perception tome na di nguyên sum kyab gi yona gi la.
그뭐 또 도매는 가서 로시데 단다로 시인바 도매들 도바 로시 도매 로시 도매 시에바들 단지도 대만티니 요래 단단 가서 시인바 그 도매 시에바 가능해 보네 안시도 도매 시에바래세 도매 시에바래 도매 시에바 대만티 바래세 그 본지 메게다 간지 메게 메돈 집이 메시도 도매 시에바래 도매 시에바 단티래세 라인바.
Yeah, non-conceptual consciousness is not necessarily direct perceivers or direct perceptions. Direct perceptions, I assume is direct perceivers. So am I right?
No, perceptual. They're conceptual.
Direct.
Perceptual. Maybe it's adjective of perceptual.
You mean conceptual is and perceptual is totally different things. So one
yeah. You see the six sense consciousness, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, they are all perceptual. Whereas mental consciousness can be perceptual or conceptual. Perceptual means direct, no, nothing between them. I see, no smell. There's directly. Maybe it's okay. I think it's just a language. I just read some. Okay, so but okay, I asked another question. Kisha, does that mean that all this awareness classified under non-conceptual always factually concordant? Wait, let's see. But Kishila said there are also non-conceptual consciousness. They are they always concordant? Am I right?
They are, just Gisha just mentioned. So non-conceptual consciousness is not always factually concordant because they are factually discordant as well.
So I apprehend a flower. That means the flower is not flower, but actually there is not a flower. I see the
I consciousness.
Sorry. Under this got mistaken, non-conceptual mistaken consciousness. I apprehending flower mean is where is the mistake?
Yeah. So just now Kishala already mentioned. So non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, the example is eye consciousness or sense of consciousness to which a snow mountain appears as blue is the example for non-conceptual mistaken consciousness, or the factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. So, and then besides so when we talk about factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness, then you might pop up and questions. Is there any factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness or not? So there is no mistaken words here. Yeah? So the second one is factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness. Is there any such factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness or not? Yes. For example, eye consciousness apprehending flower. So non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness.
When you take out the mistaken word, it's not in any of the division anymore, right? It's a new thing.
Then it can be then non-conceptual consciousness can be 또매기 시바에나 양 된투나 된미된이가 여러 가지라.
단다로 시인바
단다니 또매 투식이 시바에나 데 또바 된미된으로 가지라. 또매 된미된이 시바로 와. Yeah, so non-conceptual consciousness can be divided into two. Factually concordant non-conceptual consciousness and factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. So here, non-conceptual mistaken consciousness is the first division. Is the second division. Factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness. You understand?
다치 다니스나 왕시의 다와치 다와니스나 왕시의 서다 나서 도메 시바 대면티 바로와 그래서 배 망보여라 다와치 아치 다니스나 왕시에서
또메 투이 시바이나 데 또바 한 또바 되미 그래서 또메 기 시바 되미 된지로 알잖아.
대면티 바래 대면티 바
된지로 알잖아. Yeah, so non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness, same meaning, synonym.
Again,
Non-conceptual mistaken consciousness and factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness, synonym.
Oh,
yeah.
Division. Okay, understand.
Yeah. So then, shall I give an example like sense consciousness to which one moon appears as two moon? Then there is also an example of non-conceptual mistaken consciousness. In other words, a factually discordant non-conceptual consciousness.
Sheila. Sometimes the eye, due to some defect, whether dry, sometimes they see things which is not there. Or you rub your eye, you touch your eyeball hard, then the thing become distorted. What is it under?
See something not exist, right?
Yeah, it's non-conceptual, but it's mistaken. You rub your eye, sometimes it become, you see around thing become distorted.
Yeah, ini de pena shana so de kaza mi de Cambodia je yang na so de shu chenbo de chuai na ini de chamchong la yang de kaza tuen la me ba ini de nang de ni ji yo ro nang bo da bo ini de do do da bo ini de din nang gi yo re de nang gi yo re de ini de tuen la yo ma re ini de kaza to me tui sheba de inas
다리 미시 그런 게 매버치 드린 나서나 때 그런 tuhi chade burwa.
Jima nangshin de mewa ina. Yes, if it doesn't exist as is apprehended, then it is a non-conceptual mistaken consciousness.
Can I ask a question? And I was just for academic purposes, interest, the Chittamakra tenet. So if somebody is practicing Chittamakra, how does this teaching apply when everything externally does not exist? It's not concordantly existent. So how do these teachings apply to a person who practices Chittamakra? And there are people who practice Chittamakra only. So how does this teaching benefit them?
So ini miji de senza mo gitawa de jingyu na. Miji ge ini senza me tawa de jingyu na ini de lori jang ne kongzo la kaza pendang kaza penba kare 용기를 해서 표현 kare 용기를 해서.
다 로리스 다 지난 가서 생긴 로당 시에버 좀 로당 된다 가서 준타게 인데서 디스 체바마다 때지나 코들 빙고로 와 가서 배 지나 생각을 봐 장으로 와 로리디 배 가서 지서 생각을 봐 자고 디 준타 용조라 참마나 편 도외래 용조라 편 도외래 때 편 도외데 가서 인데선다와 디스 마다 가서 중심다보다 동시 된다 지바로 와 동시다보다 가서 생각을 봐 장한테 동시 지바로 와
동시세대 동시세대
동시다와 신다보다 그냥 시 생각을 봐도 된다 지바 차고요 된다 지바 차고요 당 가서 전타 소속인데 선다고 디스 만다와 딜레고요마 데다 핑고르스고 가서 로리디 장한테 또 가서 배 생생주군 로당데 이제 시고요 와 생생주군 로당데 이제 시고요 데페 리파치라 야보 단도 데반다보지 로리도 리파 야보지 창선나 데 생자비고라 간디지 말레그나 소속이 단당고 시대바다 간디나 다 몬체서 지바지 장에 간다로와 다 카시 강나 소소 준타군데서 만다와 디지인고래 로와 지당 아주 시자라고디 지바로와 시자라고 생각을 봐야돼
생각을 봐야돼 표현돼 네 디스 심당 심중이 도당당 심기 도당데 지부디 시에데
어때 가서 데레 당간다 생각을 봐도 도메다 생다 생주 생가서 데 참았다 간다 된다 시야 참아 가서 니랑래 생다 생주제 따고요 말에마도 시야 된다 니랑으로 와 창자
이니 디시에 가서 간디지 핑기를 해서 이제라
때 생각을 봐 노당데 시야 생각을 봐 노당 시어디 또 준타 가를 로좀 제바이나 로좀 제 레하고 용으로 와 된다 좀 고치고 용으로 와 된다 된 고치고 용으로 해서 그러와
가이스나 시대 잡으러 와 이제라 시자데
장단지 시바이나 때 시자데 준다 생자바 지나베 코랑게 신다 준다게 따와 창조 야부지 셰바이나 대생자바 코랑게 준다게 따와데 내랑 간리면 창조 야부지 식으로와 다 신다게 베 준다게 따와 치는 마시나 대소소게 따와데 맞아 베
건데 생산바 말에 또 대바로 와이실라다나 건다 대다나 또 대바로
제 너데바데 맞아 베 리파게 노단데 시다 시고 맞아 베 리파게 듀다게 리파게 노단데 너데바바 시자나 보야 주야데 너디비 준다데 레고 가서 제마콜라 제마콜라 가서 조데 너디비 두고 레고로다
세마기 콜라이네 또 대비
내 시부지 빙구리 양아 저배 제마숑 가봤다기나 시자나 보이 차는 거로
So when we study logic awareness and knowledge, so basically we study how the mind works. We study about conceptual consciousness. We study about non-conceptual consciousness. We're going to study mind and mental factors as well. So basically it is a psychology. So we are studying psychology right now. And this psychology is the foundations where other schools of tenets, they also study the same. They also study psychology. It's just that they are differ in terms of its assertions. So different schools of tenets, then they have their slight difference in their assertions. Other than that, the foundations or the basis are roughly the same, so almost the same. So even when we study valid cognitions, so valid cognitions is based on the view of the Chittamatra as well. So the sutra following school. So
densa chembo de sola pe sera gadin drebung de sota gamba shinda chujuka nima da kaji gamba kandi jina ngaso shitsa na bo lo song shitsela tambu di da ko di tangja jangurda
yeah lo sum gigola
lo sum zela ko di tangja ko ndo di bi tinta de zu shi sum bi tole ngaso sema di ko di da ko tangja nga zo ndo gurda di shitsa na bo de ma seba ya shungli ya chungja jena 네 리바가 로다는 거 지금 아시고다. 네 마자바인 람사고로 이게 흉간이야 흉청보간이야 로바이나. 예 리바가 로다다 시 간트 센센주고 로다다 저 사마디아 본거 지금 말이시고 때깔에 가보여래.
Yeah, so how say we study these foundations, then when we study tenets, then we will find it easier to understand. So even in Sarah, Ganden, Gagyu school, and Nyingma school as well, they also spent about 3 years in this the tenets, the view of the Chittamatra or Sutta following school. So and within these 3 years, then we are going to study about the mind and mental factors. We are going to study how the mind works and etc. Then we also debate about it. So debate, then you have to understand the logic and the reasoning as well. So if you do not go through this training, studying in this for about 3 years in this text, in this view of Chittamatra, then if you go straight to study those great texts, then you will find it difficult to understand.
어쩌나 ngaso gadi seran drebung de sera gadi drebung de solpa ta didda de losompe bes kro shita ta yoyo doborete mache ba ngaso lot tapalan jang guche soyorwa guche gadi lan lochi drebung lochi sera to soyore 다 간다 소비깔라 장사 조배 체마 디고를 땅자르다 돌린지야 조로 디리다
체마데
체마다 디 간다 남데 체마 남데 디고를 땅자르 간다 단다 디데도 소 된다도 소랑 하려고
네 가자한데 조데 군가 갑라디 론주 갑라
로리라 페치 소리페 다르레 페 가디라 파냠도 소 데불라 냠도 소 세라 냠도 소지와 왔다 빼자바 휴첨보 깨다 첨보 저디야 강가데 디레 체마디
Yeah, so Jirpong, Sarah, Gantin, then they spent about 3 years studying the view of Chittamatra. So even, some of you probably have heard about it, the winter debate tournament that hosts 1 year at Jirpong, then next year Sarah, Gantin, for example, so they take turn to host this winter debate tournament. So during this winter debate tournament, this very famous debate tournament, then the main thing they debate is on expositions on the valid cognitions. So this is the main thing they debate in that tournament. Yeah, so because how say we don't have that much time, like 3 years to study the text, yeah. So we are going to finish it in another month or two Don't have that long time to study.
pe mesi ya pore se ngaso pe pacha cha da ngone chane koro da ngaso kanda so so kan she ba de so so jan de ngaso du se ya rimba ji de pacha chane ro koro wa o da kanda pe ke wa sambo shi cha de se ro wa.
Yeah, so we should consider ourselves very fortunate because we have this opportunity to leave the imprints, leave such imprints in our mind stream. Then we can proceed further.
Can I ask a question, please,
Yes,
Keshala?
please.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between a factually discordant consciousness and a wrong consciousness?
Factually discordant consciousness.
Consciousness, whether it's conceptual or non-conceptual, and a wrong consciousness. What are the possibilities? Thanks.
Thank you. Takeshla, ini kasa 시바 되미돼. 시바 되미돼 당 로시에나 디 캬마캬당 디 아나 무가 주요레사.
Shepa de karla mo kase
시바 되미돼. 시바 되미돼 당 로시에 니 무가 주요레스. 야나 디 펜준 캡기요나.
da shepa de men ti pa de la lo shi yin ko de lo shi de la shepa de men ti ba wa de ni de mo ke she ko mare da da
디 캡그라 된지래라.
shepa de men ti ba ina kanda lo shi da tan ti men ti sa da rang ge ye de pe shin ji lo de rang ge ye de dan da me shin de ye ba ji de ye shin de me ban jin de ge de ji lo wa da shepa de men de
그래서 간다에 디 된지미 남장 잡으러 와야죠.
de ji mi ge nan dan da bo de da kanda shepa de men ti ba da lo shi de sa ma.
Yeah, so basically they are they are synonymous. So factually discordant consciousness or wrong consciousness is the object, the object doesn't exist as is apprehended. Yeah, so they are synonymous.
Okay, so if we talk about if you are mistaken with respect to your appearing object, because wrong consciousness and factually discordant is mistaken with respect to its object of engagement, right? Is that right?
Sorry, could you please repeat?
Okay, so if we say that they are synonyms, means is the factually discordant consciousness and wrong consciousness are mistaken with respect to its object of engagement, right? So, what about if it is mistaken with respect to its appearing object?
So whether it is a 야, 근데 계실라 시바 되미 된당 로시니 데 가서 랑기 주유라 투에 시바로 아이라.
Da shin ji lo de shi bi ba de kan da wa rang ge ye la shin ji lo de shi ba
랑기 유에나 랑기 주유이나.
rang ge ye de wa da kan da rang ge ye la shin ji lo de shi bi ba de lo hi sin shi ba ka si
랑유라
shin ji lo de shi ba da rang ge ye de nge bi ne che yin ba la ma yin ba da ye ba la me ba da kan da ka si lo de shi yin ba ye ba la me ba la ye ba yin ba la ma yin ba la yin ba den di ju rang ge de la ba shin ji lo de zin ge de la da kan da she pa de man di sina lo shi sina da ji ba re se wa.
그래서 이니 디자 로시에네 디 랑유 디 진진로도 주베 시바로 아이라. 이니 디 랑기 낭유라 투에 시바이나.
가가데 또바 텐디 칸데라 카 랑기 나일란 트리셰바 또바 텐디 칸데라
또바 텐디
또바 텐디 강가데 랑기 나일란 트리셰바로
또바 텐디 강가에네 디 랑기 낭유라 투에 시바로
트리셰바 또바 강가를 트리셰르 칸다 트리셰다 로시니 베체바 여다 데코 카가 샤고르마
또바 강가에네 디 투셰레 Yeah, so wrong consciousness is consciousness that engage wrongly or erroneously with regard to its object. So with regard to its object, yeah. So then we talk about apprehending as it being something as not being something, that exists as not being something, and vice versa. So and consciousness mistaken with its appearing object. So basically, all conceptual consciousness are mistaken, are consciousness mistaken with regard to its appearing object. So even factually concordant conceptual consciousness are consciousness mistaken with regard to its appearing object, because all conceptual consciousness are mistaken consciousness. So
Right.
mistaken.
So if we talk about, because just now you were saying the mode of apprehension, the factually discordant consciousness, the mode of apprehension does not accord with the way it exists. Right? Just now we were saying the factually discordant consciousness is one where the mode of apprehension does not accord with the mode of existence. Yeah. So in a prasangika point of view, that means all object will be factually discordant, is it not?
According to prasangika view, or?
Yeah, because the way things the way we perceive things does not accord with the way it exists. This is prasangika point of view, yeah. So does that mean that for a prasangika everything is factually discordant? Shouldn't be, yeah. I think.
So so kishala ini tanda ini nganchu kasa sheba twemi twin di kola shigi oro. Ini di sheba twemi twin di kola shigi shibika la ini kasa tobe kasa toba kasa tobe jindang gi yude. Tobe jindang gi yude ini di twin la yomar mewa ina mezang ini di twemi twin di shigi oro. Twin la kasa twin la mena ini di twemi twin di shigi ore. Tendi ina Dendi ina ini kasa thank you lula ini di chang sheba kanga ini di toba twemi twinde inas dendi marawas
haka de maro
dendi marawa
hanju lula ta tanda de nga so chida topa twemi twimi sa rang pin jinda ji yodi yo me kesha shegore
sheba twemi twin ro
sheba tanti la mati sna de khanda tanda de ro ta hanju lula tanda de ki cha chia khoro yo ma hanju wala nga so chishi ma chu ke ba kesha shesana hanju wala pe toni ngeson to bi she ma to sheba yonzo chishi re segore sheba ma chu ba ji yo ma re segore kanda toni ngeson to bi lo jibo chishi ma re ma to chanso chishi re segore 데 탄주알 기제 마시 마다야 데 창선 투도 그러지 단다 데 가서 조 시자치는 만도 데 제마 탄주 준다고라 말레우디 데 시에 저로 와
단다니 데 땡큐에 룰라 아니 데 어떤이 또 비시랍 데 마도 셰바 강가 데 투시레스
돈이 또 비셔 짱 말에 돈이 무슨 또비
어떤이 무슨도
또비 시 데마도 셰바 연조 그렇 투시래 다들 투시 인당 시야 여러고 다 단다 유쇼 마더로
야 아니 데 셰바 강가 데 투시로
투시래 다 로시세 와도 양 가가시구라
셰바양 튼튼단 되미 되니가 요로
네
투시네 이네 양 셰바 튼튼단 셰바 되미 되니가 요로
데데 요로 당한서 단팀은 디세와데 랑드 벤진다지 여조디 여다 메단다데 휴임바 이 여데 응에네 진심바 나신 두나 단티레스 응에네 진심바 나신 문두나 단문디 바레스 다 셰바 단티세 코랑을라 셰바 단티레 계시 시부도와 다 셰바 단티레 지랑 용조를 빼 또바다 또미 셰바 창상을 바지야 다 지바로와
Yeah, so it's not all consciousness is factually discordant. So consciousness, so whether it is a factually concordant or factually discordant, so according to prasangika, all consciousness are mistaken consciousness. According to prasangika madhyamika, all consciousness are mistaken consciousness. So other than exalted wisdom directly realizing emptiness, all consciousness are mistaken consciousness. So consciousness in general there is still factually concordant and factually discordant as well. So then back to whether the object of the mode of apprehensions exists or not.
So we are saying mistaken consciousness are mistaken with respect to its appearing object, whereas wrong consciousness is mistaken with respect to its object of engagement. Is that right?
So, like kishala design tanda tushi sete, tu sheba sete, ini di kasa rangi nangyula tu sheba de, any the two share right
Yes, yes.
any the lo she na any the rangi juyu la kaza rangi la rangyu chinji lo du shube sheba de
어때서 다 참만을 주대요. 로시도 저기 가서 도미지 셰바도 저를 샤와이나 때때 장상을 주대로 갖고.
단단 lo she na di kaza rangyu chinji lo du shube sheba right la
오래 때때 치시에 로시
yana de rangi juyu rangyu ina de rangi juyu ina
유이데 가능한 보래 코 가능한 보라 주대요래 코 가능한 보대래 요 말에 코나 로와 가능한 보 나대요래 네요 말에 코네 배코는 티시 차대 랑그 열라 신지로도 주대로 와.
rangi kaza kanri ngobo na we wang she na de yang lo she le yang wang she ro
我往西了，
kaza yang lo she yang tu she de
多把的说了，我是哪一些话的，人进到就是的说罗汉下过罗汉人，但等到讲了我不呢往西的是多，讲了我不呢往西的这讲的，当然给就有人出点讲的了哇。
rangi juyu la tu de yo ro any de rangi juyu de chinji lo du shue sheba rang
这都是的哦。
kanri ngombo na we wang she na tu she yang re
这些
lo she yang re
老些人应该的，他是。
那说呀de yinji minji da rangyu de yingo marwa isla lo she na de rangyu yingo marwa
老些呢，让个原来新的老的修过，他修也不修过是。
Yeah. So wrong consciousness is consciousness engaged erroneously or wrongly with regard to its object. And mistaken consciousness is mistaken with regard to its appearing object. So an example is sense consciousness to which snow mountain appears as blue is a wrong consciousness, also is a mistaken consciousness. So it is a wrong consciousness, then it becomes a consciousness that engage wrongly with regard to its object of engagement.
Thank you. That is
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That de jela nga de ma ndo ma de jelen zinda de khatu ma de tia ti rangri de shin ri si do wa. Ye ma rangri de shin ri ma chin do ai ta de ma cha ba ina de nga so de yu yu jin de so ba kan da yu la yu se na yu de shin yu ju de so ma jing de jin ne yu dang de ji xia yu wa.
那yu xian yu ju yu
那yu xian yu ju yu de so ma do dang ji.
Yeah, so next class I'm going to talk about twofold divisions of awareness, self-knowers and other knowers. So after we talk about it, then I will talk about object. So for example, appearing object, object of comprehension, and object of engagement, etc. So I'm going to talk about it, object after these self-knowers and other knowers.
Yeah. Thank you. 안서 게이자 원들라티네 쳇템바 지바던 로와데와 예간다 안자닌들라 마주다 미게라서바 마유하다 단중화시 네발라서바 파도야 디 네한테 파 뉴드트에 두스모아치에치나 단 네바트설페 안자페 자닌들라 네바리 미초보레 신지 간리나 로바 징케 다디설라 로바 징키 미스터 진나 코란서 참아봐 간다로와 다 솔럽 첨보 사야다 더 상지지 공부봐 뉴도 토야 오 두스지 게상마 인스.
So we conclude with dedication. We dedicate the roots of virtue accumulated, especially through these Dharma teaching sessions, maybe the complete course for Buddha Dharma to flourish to all 10 directions and for sentient beings to have excellent happiness. We also dedicate for the world peace. May the world be free of all disasters, natural disasters, and disasters caused by man-made disasters as well. So and all sorts of disasters. So and then we also dedicate these roots of virtue for all sentient beings, in particular those patients, those who are infected, like for example, those who are infected by this with this virus, and then those who are living in a very poor conditions, poor environment. Then and besides that, then other sentient beings such as animal beings as well. So we also dedicate these roots of virtue for all sentient beings, and to quickly collect the complete the 2 collections of merits and quickly achieve the state of enlightenment.
Dagi Jene Zabi Gewande, Dendan Rua, Kuna Kampeda, Chiba, Jite, Losan Traba, Kindi Nimborin, Seje, Yo, Janjo, Senjo, Remboje, Machi, Pana, Chiju, Chiba, Nyamame, Baya, Konya, Kondon, Pewa, Chon Jambe, Baye, Jedan, Chembada, Kundo, Zampete, Ati, Dabin, Jizo, Dalos, Gewande, Tanjera, Dongo, Tony, Tawarin, Boche, Machi, Pana, Chiju, Chiba, Nyamame, Konya, Kondon, Pewa, Yorini, Tawarin, Boje, Machi, Pana, Chiju, Chiba, Nyamame, Konya, Kondon, Pewa, Yo, Tuzan, Changian, Jango, Jaye, Zinjo, Peye, Guzedo, Ponte, Chozo, Peye, Lene, Lozo, Deje, Denda, Yaden, Yo, Tomni, Nije, Sundon, Jube, La Chiche, Sante, Kanchi, Jindin, Chana, Pema, Tenzi, Janzo, Soan, Dezo, Yende, Lindo, Yo, Njiden, Kanten, Pende, Marika, Kanen, Juye, Sambe, Kadri, Somya, Tenzi, Janzo, La Soan, Dezo, Yende, Lindo, Shuo, Kanra, Koi, Shingan, Penda, Dewa, Malin, Juye, Kere, Zawa, Tenzi, Janzo, Shabi, Sindi, Bado, Denjuji. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kishla. Thank you,
Kishla.
everyone.
Okay,